Thank you, everybody. Very exciting to be back here again in a post-pandemic kind of world, although not entirely. Let me introduce my company first.
That was sweet.
All right. So you have to admit, we make some of the funnest and coolest products ever. It's all about adventure, it's all about fun, and I get to test them out, which is a pretty sweet gig. So myself personally, I think, go around and introduce me, but I've been data obsessed since I first started my career over 20 years ago, literally in data. I kind of fell into it accidentally before anybody was thinking that data was going to be cool or of any value. I studied in business, so no tech background originally, but kind of started to do some development and kept on that path. I can see faces that I know from past conferences or past companies we worked together. I went back to school because I believe in education and I like to learn. I spent over 10 years in consulting, continuously learning about data and about companies and their business operating models. I spent 6 years at the Aldo Group, which is a large retailer worldwide in fashion footwear and accessories. I went to Ubisoft, gaming company, where I got to play with some of the largest volumes of data you could ever imagine because, well, you capture everything in the game. Every little piece of data. And then I decided to leave Ubisoft and joined BRP, which stands for Bombardier Recreational Products. And sometimes people don't know what BRP stands for, hence the little video to introduce the cool stuff that we do. But I'm not done. I keep on learning everywhere I go. I also teach at University in Montreal, HEC, where I get to share that knowledge that I've accumulated over the years with everybody. But the stuff that really matters for me, even more than data, believe it or not, are my activities on the side. So I love to do renovations. I build stuff myself. When I'm not building, I'm cooking for my family because I like to cook. I also have a very, very kind and supportive family. My wife is in Montreal right now with both kids, supporting everybody while I'm out here having fun in Sweden, away from the hard realities of Montreal life. And I have two beautiful sons, this one that always poses very cutely, and this one that I can't figure out how to get him to pose for a normal picture. But they're cute. But we're here to talk about data. We're here to talk about data and strategy and how do we build that proper organizational structure in order to set us up for success and deliver value. Has anybody crafted their own data strategy recently? Show of hands. Was it fun and easy? Enjoyable, I agree. Well, how do you get started though? How do you do this? Well, you don't go into a company and define a data strategy by yourself. The dumbest thing you can do is literally come out and say, I've been doing data for 22 years. I know data. I can define your strategy. I can suggest the org structure. But who are you? You're one person. The company is a living organism, and it has a lot to offer. There are people that have been there for 20, 25 years, 10 years, 5 years, doesn't really matter. But they know their company, they know their business, and you need to surround yourself with those knowledge. And so you go and you start to meet people. When I joined BRP, what I did was spend my first 90 days interacting with as many people as I could to understand the intricacies of what gets done and how with data, and also what doesn't get done with data. So I met people at all levels of the organization, from analysts all the way to my peers at the management committee level. I conducted 77 interviews and meetings. I collected hundreds of pages of notes from local to international teams, because we have teams all over the world, and everybody uses or doesn't use data in a different way. I discovered a lot of opportunities that we could do stuff better with data. I also learned a lot about the organization, things that even if you've been with the organization for a long time, being in the role that you are in today, you may not know about. So use it as a learning experience for yourself, but also use it as an education experience for the people that you are meeting, to talk to them and teach them a little bit about where data comes from. One of the things we don't do about, and I've heard people talk about data literacy and the importance of understanding how data comes about, is explain where this data comes from and how does it appear magically out of nowhere. Data comes because of an event that has been triggered. Something has happened. Somebody clicked on your website, looked at an image, submitted a purchase order. We need to identify what those data entities are that matter to us based on our business strategies. What are we trying to enable as a company? We then track those data entities by putting tags or by creating code around it. We gather those elements, we clean them up, we consolidate them, and we create this querying layer so that our people can start to analyze, interpret, and derive insights from all of this data. What I do with this slide when I meet our management teams is explain to them that the part they see, what they are familiar with, is only the tip of the iceberg. They look at the analysis, interpretation, and insights to inform decisions. What they fail to understand is that 80% of the workload, and I know you guys all know this because you're all data folks, but what they fail to understand is that 80% of the workload is that hidden part, the part that took the Titanic out. So we need to educate people while we're going through this process. And what we discover is that there are challenges in data, and we all face the same challenges. For example, that we don't have common definitions or standards, that the teams are siloed and using different analytical methods, that data literacy is sparse and it is not equally distributed around the organization. You'll have pockets of brilliant data analysts, and you'll have people that unfortunately won't even realize that the job they do impacts the quality or the availability of the data. We lack in governance. We spend too much time manually preparing data. And you can't solve that just by wishful thinking. You need to set up programs and you need to put in place the right organizational model in order to be able to drive change and deliver value. So of course, I think we can all agree that every single consulting firm on the face of the earth has come up with the world's greatest data organizational structure. And every couple of years that changes. And there is no magical solution. What you do is you find the pieces that make the most sense and you adapt them to your company's culture and your company's structure. So if you think of the data mesh, there are several concepts that I find absolutely valuable and that I take back and I adapt to my company's realities. So this isn't going to solve all of your problems. Nothing ever will. But I'm hoping that what I will be sharing with you is going to be educational, and if you want to talk more about it, I'll be happy to talk more throughout the conference days. There's a lot of material in the slides. The reason why I put a lot of material is so that you can take it away with you after and have notes that you can also leverage at some point. So some of the slides will go by a little bit quicker, but you'll have that material for yourself. So let's talk about the three main organizational models that everybody understands. Decentralization. Well, there are pros and cons to every single model. So in decentralization, we have some pros and some cons. For instance, it is a symbol of relatively immature organizations, and it's usually how it begins. You have little pop-ups in different places, but people work in silos. We don't really have standards. There's no view on the total spend on data and analytics. Best practices aren't typically shared or ever, really. However, the proximity to the business is astounding. You know everything there is to know. You're part of that team, so you understand the business. It is incredibly flexible and agile, can turn around on a 10 cent, but duplication is inevitable, unfortunately. So pros and cons to that model. And then we kind of swing over to the other extreme, which is a fully centralized org. From a centralized org, again, pros and cons. It's great, it's strong, it's central from an educational perspective, from a career opportunities perspective, from a best practices, common architecture, economies of scale. The resources get dispatched to different projects. Priorities are managed centrally. That's not so much of a pro, really, because you kind of start to lose your proximity to the business, right? Your projects and activities are all led centrally. That proximity that is lost translates into a loss of understanding of the business. Unfortunately, it becomes a little bureaucratic with ticketing systems and no, you gotta wait and you gotta do it this way, and if it's not done the way we tell you to, then it's just not going to happen. And it becomes slow. It becomes inflexible. People become frustrated and they just can't take it anymore. Agreed? Ultimately, what I'm talking about is about balance. There's pros and there are cons to both models. So how do we get an org structure that captures the pros on one side, captures the pros on the other side, and tries to minimize the cons on both? Well, what we want to do is try to find that equilibrium. If you're too centralized, then you become very in a consultant mindset. You're just delivering your project, you move to the next, you lose that proximity. But if you're too personally invested, then you don't focus on the bigger picture either. So we need to strike a balance between those two. The perception of objectivity, when you're in a central org, you might be perceived as more objective. When you are in one business team, you may be seen as biased to that actual team. Bureaucracy versus efficiency, redundancy versus effectiveness, silo versus big picture. So how do we balance it out? Well, we start to look at something called the federated model. And what's the federated model? Well, it's kind of a hybrid of both organizations. The business drives the priorities. So we keep that proximity. We are focused on deliveries that bring value for the business unit that we service. We have a standard architecture because we are governed by a central entity. We manage to achieve our economies of scale. We have a sense of belonging to the organization that we are supporting. But we remain agile, flexible organization. More importantly, because I'm somebody that loves data governance, we remain compliant and we remain governed. Not to say that there's no challenges with getting there as well. There is definitely going to be some complexity in the change management aspect of it. But isn't there always? Change management is probably one of the most complicated things to handle properly when you are changing the way your company is behaving, when you are changing the way your organization works. But it can be done. I've done it before, I'm doing it again, and I know it can be done. So how do we get there? Another story. Over time, what you'll notice is that throughout maturity, companies are going to go from that decentralized model to, oh my God, we don't know what's going on, let's centralize everything, to, oh my God, this is not working anymore, let's try and federate. So we can do this because it's been done, but there's still something missing. A federated model is not the answer to all of your problems. You want to think by data domain. What's a data domain? Okay, we'll look at the data domains in 2 slides. So the data strategy that I'm proposing is based on 4 fundamental elements. There are 4 key critical elements to a successful federated model in a data domain-driven strategy. The first one is setting up those domain teams. We'll talk about those in a second, but ultimately, very quickly, a data domain is what? It's a grouping of data elements that go well together on which you can do analysis in and of itself, but there's also a lot of value of crossing domain A with domain B. Think of sales data. You can do analysis on sales data by itself. It is going to deliver value. But if you cross your sales data with marketing data and with customer data, those 3 data domains together, you get a compounding network effect of value in analytics. The other part is your data platform. You need a cloud-based, consumption-based data platform that can support your growth and your deployment and your scalability for each of your different data domains. Your data catalog is going to service the aspect of data discoverability. You need to find your assets. Today, your assets are likely all over the place. I'm not talking for everybody in general, but it's not always easy to find a table that's going to answer your question. So you need to know what does what and where it's at. And the last thing is this very important concept of data interoperability. It's great to have different data domains. If they don't talk to each other, you're not getting anywhere. How do you achieve data interoperability? Well, in that federated model, through very strict governance, you have standard architecture, development standards, best practices. You have teams that use the same dimensions. You have same tech stack to support people to build what they need to build. We can then have our data being interoperable. So the domains, ultimately, what are they? Well, your data domains, like I said, it's a group of data elements. But what you want to make sure is that those data domains are small but large enough to support multiple business teams. The sales data domain isn't just going to be there for the marketing team or the sales team or the customer team or the finance team. It supports all of them. It's not just for one of them, right? And if you're doing it just for one of them, then you're going to be redoing it for every single one. Data domains are immutable in time. Just like I was just saying right now, if you have the sales data domain, it is always going to be sales data domain. However, your business teams may change through time. You may acquire a new company and your brands may change, or you may divest from one and that'll change it as well. So focus on something that won't change too easily, too regularly from a structural perspective. They need to be self-sufficient, the teams. A data domain team is a cross-functional, multidisciplinary team that can deliver a data product from the ingestion all the way to the analytics aspect of it. So they are essentially nodes on a large web of multiple data teams, what some of you may have heard as the data mesh, right? Multiple different nodes that are interconnected through interoperability and common practices. They are responsible for multiple different factors, including the creation of your data product, like I mentioned, from beginning to end, the discoverability, so the creation and the design of all of the metadata that's going to allow people to find and understand what those products do, the governance of it, the quality, the compliance, and the operational health, the uptime, et cetera, et cetera. What those teams do not do, they don't define the priority sequence in which items need to be delivered, in which features are getting delivered. Those are done by steerings of key stakeholders within those business teams. Why? Because we want to make sure that we're delivering for value. We're not centralizing the decision-making on the processes of the features that are going to be delivered. Business knows that better than I ever will. They know their business. I just want to enable them. So let's talk about your new data organization. How does this work? Well, based on 4 fundamental pillars of architecture, governance, auditability, security, etc., we have different domain data teams. So let's take one domain team that's going to be building on top of your tool set, on top of your data platform, your ETL tools, etc. So if we take domain team 1, let's say it's the sales data domain team, they are going to be architecting, ingesting, transforming, building the ETLs, enforcing the quality, making sure that everything is up to par. You're going to have multiple data domain teams, and they are going to be delivering data products that are interoperable so that analytics teams or knowledge workers in the business or anybody that needs to be leveraging this information can then go across those different data domains, pull out what they need to run their analysis, and everybody is happy. But you know what you can't do this with? Your grandfather's data platform. It ain't going to work. So let's talk about one of the fundamental bricks that needs to be there. Otherwise, we're not going to get to where we need to go. Back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, the data warehouse was the king of the place. Everything fit neatly in little boxes. It was well organized. There was no issue. Everything was structured and happy. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what angle you're looking at, the data lake came around because of all of our unstructured data. So we found another place to put this in. But then we had two completely different approaches to managing data with different tool sets that didn't always play very nice with each other. So some vendors came back and said, well, you can use my data warehousing technology to build your data lake. Or you can use my data lake technology to build your data warehouse. And where did we end up? With a data lake that sank to the bottom with no governance and nobody knows where anything is. And although he's smiling, I'm pretty sure none of us are smiling when we were facing those situations. So we want a data platform. We don't want a data lake. We don't want a data warehouse. We want a data platform. We want a cloud data platform that can support us. And what we're doing is, again, based on those 4 precepts, we're exposing a platform of data so that the different domain teams acting as nodes on our network of data teams can build products that are interoperable and accessible within a centralized area for teams to go and do their analysis. Now, this is the whole concept of sharing your data, which is great. But then how do the business teams who want to build their own stuff go about doing it? Well, we need to empower them. We need to drive innovation with trusted data. And we do that by exposing this fantastic architecture, which, by the way, is very scientifically proven. No, I'm kidding. But by exposing this to those horizontal teams, we give them the ability to have their own little laboratories for data, another data node, if you will. Those are our consumption teams. They can then go and pull data from those different data domains. They can also ingest data from the outside if they're working with a partner. And with that, build their own products and share the products between the different consumption domains in order to be able to drive further value. But all doing it on a basis of trust to drive that innovation. So just as I finish up, I just want to leave you with some parting thoughts. First of all, there are no sacred cows. It's not because your company has been doing it in a certain way and that they are decentralized or that they are centralized or that they are this or that you need to continue doing it this way. I believe in challenging everything, and I believe in people challenging me too. And that's a lot of fun. That's how I learn, and I think that's how we all learn. Try to build thinking about tomorrow, not about yesterday, because that's not going to drive any value, and build your data product for value. Don't build something just for the sake of building it. Build it because it's going to actually enable your business strategies and drive some value at the outset of it. Don't forget that over-centralization is just as bad as under-centralization. It's finding that middle ground. But more importantly, listen to your company. Listen to what they are telling you. Listen to their culture. And no matter what model you think is right for you, adapt it to fit that organizational structure and culture that you have at your company. And that is all I had for today. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, I'll be around. Thank you.